My friends, I want to tell you something today. God has a purpose for your life. You are not here by accident. You are not just wandering through life with no direction, no meaning, no calling. You are created by a God who loves you, a God who has placed his hand upon you, a God who is calling you to something greater than you could ever imagine. But how do you know? How can you be sure that you are chosen for a greater purpose? What are the signs that God is calling you to something beyond yourself? Let me share with you today the unmistakable marks of a life set apart by God. 1. Restlessness in your heart. Have you ever felt that stirring deep within you, a sense that there is more to life than what you are currently experiencing? That's not just your emotions. That is God calling you. When God has a greater purpose for you, he won't let you settle for anything less. Moses felt that restlessness when he lived in Pharaoh's palace. He had all the wealth, all the privilege, all the power, but he knew he was meant for something more. He was called to deliver God's people. And you, my friend, may feel that same holy dissatisfaction, that sense that God has something greater ahead. 2. Doors closing and others opening. Sometimes we make our own plans, but God has a way of redirecting us. You may have faced closed doors in your life, jobs that didn't work out, relationships that ended, plans that fell apart. But I want you to hear me today. When God closes a door, it's because he has a better one waiting for you. Think about Joseph. His own brothers betrayed him. He was thrown into a pit, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and sent to prison. But every setback was a setup for God's plan. God was positioning him to be a ruler in Egypt, to save many lives. What you see as rejection may actually be God's redirection. 3. A passion that won't let you go. When God chooses you for a greater purpose, he puts a fire in your heart that you cannot ignore. Maybe you feel drawn to serve others, to preach the gospel, to start a ministry, to help the broken. That desire isn't from you alone. It is God stirring something inside of you. Jeremiah felt this when he said, "His word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I am weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot." Jeremiah 29:9. When God chooses you, there is something inside of you that won't let you quit. 4. Trials and opposition. My friend, let me tell you something. Today, the enemy will not attack someone who isn't a threat. If you have been facing spiritual battles, if you've felt opposition, if life has been trying to knock you down, it may be because God has chosen you for something greater. Look at David. He was just a shepherd boy, but God had chosen him to be a king. And before he could wear the crown, he had to fight giants, run from enemies, and go through trials. Your battles today are preparing you for your purpose tomorrow. 5. A calling to step out in faith. God's purpose for your life will require faith. He may be calling you to leave behind comfort, to step into the unknown, to trust him even when you don't have all the answers. When Jesus called Peter to walk on water, it made no sense. But faith isn't about understanding, it's about obedience. Some of you today feel that call. Maybe God is asking you to start something new, to step into ministry, to go where he leads. My friend, don't let fear hold you back. If God has chosen you, he will equip you. He will provide, he will guide, and he will never leave you. Will you answer the call? So I ask you today, do you see the signs? Has God been stirring in your heart? Have you faced trials, felt a calling, seen doors open and close? If so, don't ignore it. You were chosen for a greater purpose. But here's the question. Will you say yes? God can call you, but you must answer. The Bible says in Isaiah 6:8, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me." God is calling you. Will you step into your purpose? Will you trust him? Will you surrender to his plan? Today is the day to say, Lord, here I am. Use me. The world is waiting, your purpose is waiting, and God is waiting for your yes. Will you give it to him today? 1.a. Restlessness in your heart. When God chooses you for something greater, he won't let you settle for less. You feel an inner stirring, a sense that there is more to life than what you are currently experiencing. This holy dissatisfaction is not random. It is God calling you into his divine plan. Moses felt this restlessness while in Pharaoh's palace, knowing he was meant for something more. Many people chase success, but true fulfillment comes from walking in God's purpose. If you feel unsettled, it may be because God is preparing you for a new season. Philippians 2:13 says, "For it is God who works in you, both to will and to work for His good pleasure." 2. Doors closing and others opening. God will sometimes close doors to redirect you toward His greater plan. What you see as rejection is often God's protection and preparation. Joseph faced betrayal, slavery, and prison before stepping into his purpose as a ruler. God moves us forward by removing what is no longer part of His plan for us. Revelation 3:7 says, "What He opens no one can shut, and what He shuts no one can open." If you've faced disappointment, ask God what new path He is preparing for you. Every closed door is an invitation to trust God for something greater. God's purpose for your life is never behind you, it's always ahead. If you see these signs in your life, don't ignore them. God is calling you, He is stirring something inside of you, redirecting your path, placing a passion in your heart, and preparing you through trials. But the choice is yours. Will you answer the call? Will you trust Him? Will you step into the greater purpose He has for you? Today is your moment to say, "Lord, here I am. Use me." A restlessness in your heart, the first sign of God's calling. Have you ever felt a deep, unshakable restlessness in your heart? A sense that you were made for more than the routine of life, more than just going through the motions? My friend, that restlessness is not an accident. It is not a random feeling. It is the voice of God stirring something inside of you, calling you to a greater purpose. Throughout Scripture, we see that when God chooses someone for something greater, He often begins with this inner stirring, a holy dissatisfaction with the way things are. He places a longing in their heart that cannot be ignored, a sense that they were created for something beyond what they can currently see. This restlessness is not meant to frustrate you, it is meant to awaken you. It is God's way of calling you higher, pulling you closer, and preparing you for His divine assignment. Moses, a restless heart in Pharaoh's palace. Think about Moses. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace, surrounded by wealth, power, and privilege. By the world's standards, he had everything a person could ever want, and yet, deep in his heart, there was a stirring. He knew he was meant for something greater. He saw the suffering of his people, and he couldn't ignore it. He wasn't satisfied with comfort when God was calling him to a greater purpose. That restlessness led him to make a choice. He could have stayed in the palace, lived a life of luxury, and ignored God's calling, but instead, he chose to follow the burden in his heart. That burden was a sign of his calling. It was proof that he was not just an ordinary man. He was chosen by God to deliver His people. And you, my friend, may be feeling the same stirring today. You may be in a season where everything looks fine on the outside, but something in your heart tells you that you are made for more. That is God calling you. God will not let you settle for less. When God has chosen you for a greater purpose, He will not allow you to settle for anything less than His best. That is why you may feel unsettled in your current situation. Maybe your job feels unfulfilling. Maybe the things that once excited you no longer satisfy your soul. Maybe you have a growing hunger for more of God, a desire to serve, a passion to make a difference. That restlessness is a gift. It is God disrupting your comfort to lead you into your calling. If He let you stay comfortable, you might never step into the purpose He has for you. But because He loves you, He is stirring your heart, making you aware that you were created for something greater. The Apostle Paul, a holy discontent. The Apostle Paul experienced this same kind of restlessness. Before he became the great preacher of the gospel, he was a man named Saul, persecuting Christians and living according to his own plans. But even in his rebellion, God had a greater purpose for him. One day, on the road to Damascus, God stopped him in his tracks. He blinded him with His presence and spoke to him, saying, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" Acts 9:04. From that moment, Paul's life was never the same. He went from chasing his own ambitions to becoming one of the greatest preachers the world has ever known. But here's the key. Paul had to respond to God's calling. He had to surrender his own plans. He had to let go of his past and embrace the new purpose God had for him. That restlessness in his soul led him to his divine destiny. Could God be stirring you today? Maybe you are in a season where you feel uncomfortable, uncertain, or even frustrated with where you are in life. Maybe you feel like something is missing, like you were made for more. If so, don't ignore that feeling. It is a sign that God is calling you to something greater. God never stirs your heart without a reason. He is preparing you. He is shifting things in your life. He is placing a divine hunger in you, a desire for something more of His presence, more of His purpose, more of His power. But you must respond. You must be willing to say, Lord, I don't want to stay where I am. I want to follow you into the greater purpose you have for me. My friend, God is calling you. That restlessness in your heart is not random, it is divine. It is proof that you are chosen for something greater. One of the clearest signs that God has chosen you for a greater purpose is the way He directs your path. Have you ever experienced a closed door in your life? A job that didn't work out, a relationship that ended, a dream that seemed to fall apart? It's easy to see these moments as disappointments, but what if I told you they are often a sign of God's hand at work? You see, when God has a greater purpose for you, He won't allow you to stay in places that no longer align with His plan. He will close doors not to punish you, but to protect you and to lead you to something greater. At the same time, He will open new doors, doors that align with His calling for your life. But the challenge is this: will you trust Him when a door closes? Will you have the faith to walk through the new doors He opens? Joseph, a life of closed and open doors. Let's look at Joseph, one of the greatest examples of how God uses closed and open doors to fulfill His purpose. As a young man, Joseph had a dream that he would one day be in a position of great authority. But instead of stepping immediately into that dream, Joseph faced a series of closed doors. His own brothers, driven by jealousy, threw him into a pit and sold him into slavery. That was the first closed door. Later, while serving faithfully in Potiphar's house, he was falsely accused and thrown into prison. Another closed door. For years, it seemed like Joseph's life was nothing but setbacks, disappointments, and lost opportunities. But what Joseph didn't know at the time was that God was positioning him for something greater. Each closed door led him closer to his destiny. In prison, he met Pharaoh's cupbearer, which led to his opportunity to interpret Pharaoh's dream. That moment was the open door that changed everything. Joseph was promoted to second in command over all of Egypt, fulfilling the very dream God had given him years before. Are you facing closed doors? Maybe right now you're in a season where doors are closing around you. Perhaps you lost a job. Maybe a relationship you thought would last forever came to an end. Maybe an opportunity you were hoping for suddenly disappeared. I want you to hear this today. That closed door is not the end of your story. It is God's way of guiding you into something better. We serve a God who sees the full picture. He knows where He is taking you. What you see as a disappointment, God sees as a divine redirection. He is shutting doors that would lead you away from your purpose and opening doors that will bring you into the destiny He has prepared for you. God's closed doors are always for your good. The Bible tells us in Revelation 3:7, what He opens no one can shut, and what He shuts no one can open. This means that when God closes a door, no amount of effort on your part can force it open. And when God opens a door, no enemy, no obstacle, and no force in this world can shut it. Think about that for a moment. If a door has closed in your life, it's because God Himself has shut it. He has removed that opportunity, that relationship, that path, because it was not His best for you. And when God opens a door, you don't have to fight for it. You don't have to manipulate circumstances or push your way in. When the time is right, God will open the right door, and all you have to do is walk through it in faith. Your open door is coming. If you are in a season of closed doors right now, I want to encourage you. Your open door is coming. God is not finished with your story. He is leading you, preparing you, and positioning you for something greater. Think about how many times in Scripture people had to go through seasons of waiting, loss, and uncertainty before they walked into their purpose. Abraham had to wait for years before receiving God's promise. David was anointed king, but had to go through years of struggle before sitting on the throne. Peter had to leave his fishing boat behind before he could follow Jesus. Your life is no different. If God is closing doors, trust Him. If He is opening new ones, have the courage to step through them. He knows exactly what He is doing, and He will never lead you where His grace cannot sustain you. Trust the God who holds the keys. So I ask you today, will you trust the God who holds the keys to every door? Will you stop trying to force open doors that God has closed? Will you have the faith to walk through the new doors He is opening for you? Remember this, God's plans for your life are greater than anything you could imagine. What He has prepared for you is far better than what you are leaving behind. Don't fear the closed doors, rejoice, because they are leading you to something greater. Your purpose is ahead of you, not behind you. Keep trusting, keep walking, and get ready, because the doors God is opening will lead you into the destiny He has prepared for you if you see the signs, if you feel the stirring in your heart, the unusual challenges, the divine restlessness, or the growing hunger for God. Know this, you have been chosen for a greater purpose. God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. He takes ordinary people and does extraordinary things through them. Moses doubted himself. David was overlooked. Paul had a troubled past, yet God used them mightily, and He wants to use you too. But here's the question. Will you answer the call? God will not force His plan on you. He invites you. He stirs your heart. He places a desire in your spirit, but you must be willing to step out in faith. You must seek Him, trust Him, and walk in obedience. The signs are there. The hand of God is upon you. Now is the time to embrace your calling. So rise up, seek His will, trust His process, and step into the purpose for which you were created. Because when God chooses you, He equips you, empowers you, and leads you to something greater than you could ever imagine.